Hey, and welcome to another episode of Ghost Countries. Do you remember when we talked about the ancient state of Epirus? Well, this is kind of a follow-up episode. Today, we'll be talking about the Despotate of Epirus, a story that involves the rise of the Ottoman Empire, Black Death, 3 Crusades, and the sacking of Europe's largest city at the time. Oh, and there's also the Mongol invasion, so yeah, we've got a lot going on in this episode. And if you haven't seen our episode about the ancient state of Epirus, just click the card above me. And with that out of the way, let's get to it. Last time we ended with the ancient state of Epirus becoming somewhat unwillingly a part of the Roman Empire. And now, skipping ahead some 1500 years, the whole situation is a mess, again. So first we'll take a step back and talk about the circumstances in which the despotate was founded. Welcome to the year 1190. It's the middle of the Third Crusade, and the Mediterranean is roughly split between 3 different religions. Catholicism dominates much of Europe, while Orthodox Christianity holds sway in the southeast, and Islam controls North Africa, Arabia, and most of Asia Minor. Greece, and the western portion of Asia Minor, are then governed by the Byzantine Empire, whose emperor sits in the ancient city of Constantinople, modern Istanbul. Oh, and random fact, the Turkish name of Istanbul likely is derived from the Greek phrase İstanbul'un, meaning in or to the city, which itself comes from the Byzantine usage of referring to Constantinople simply as the city. Anyway, it was here during the Third Crusade that an army under the command of the Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick Barbarossa, saw passage across the Hellespont, or Dardanelles, a narrow strait which forms the continental boundary between Europe and Asia. And while the then reigning Byzantine Emperor, Isaac II, had previously agreed to allow their passage, he seemed to be having some buyer's remorse concerning the arrangement. So, Barbarossa's army began sacking local settlements in Byzantine territory until Isaac allowed them passage, with the usual exchange of hostages, of course. The relationship between the Byzantine Empire and other European powers was already a tense one. Constantinople was the major trading center in the eastern Mediterranean, and nearly 50% of the city's inhabitants were foreigners hailing from Western and Central Europe. A significant portion of these were merchants from other trading powerhouses like Venice and Genoa. Pogroms and occasional attacks on merchants were not uncommon during this period, though, with some foreigners even being expelled from the city. Over the following years, questions about foreign influence and xenophobia weakened the Byzantine government and therefore the power of the emperor. Then, in 1198, Pope Innocent III called for another crusade. Its goal, conquest of the Levant, and many soon joined in this theological call to arms. The Republic of Venice, for its part, agreed to transport around 12,000 of these Christian soldiers to the Holy Land. Of course, this service would not be provided freely, and when the Crusaders failed to pay the originally agreed to amount of 85,000 silver marks, something had to be done. The whole deal was actually quite risky for Venice, since in building the ships, they had essentially halted all other trading activity, taking on a significant debt, and following this, they would still need tens of thousands of men to man the fleet, placing further strain on the Venetian economy. And so, looking to make back their investment, Venice considered reconquering the city of Zara, which had rebelled in 1181 and thereafter allied itself with the King of Hungary and Croatia. Even though it went against the very idea of a crusade, the cash-strapped men agreed to the Venetian demands and soon conquered the Christian city in their stead. Following this, the Crusaders wintered in Zara from 1202 to 1203, and eventually decided not to head for the Levant, but rather set their sights on Egypt, which formed the core lands of the Ayyubid dynasty. After conquering Egypt, they would move to the Levant, and in doing so, they believed they could isolate the region, making its conquest all the more easy. But, while loafing around in Zara, they got a request from a rather interesting person, the son of the recently dethroned Byzantine emperor, asking for their help in toppling the reigning emperor, Alexios III. They agreed, and what followed is definitely worthy of an episode in its own right. Probably we'll get around to that someday, but keeping it short, a series of events paved way for a siege of Constantinople in 1203, which ended in complete disaster for the city. During the siege, a fire destroyed 440 acres, approximately 1.8 kilometers, leaving some 20,000 homeless, and, following its conquest, Constantinople, an inspiration for artists, the bulwark against Islamic expansion into Europe, and the largest city in the known world, was sacked. The Constantinople from before 1203 would never fully recover, and it was only centuries later under Ottoman rule that the city once again reached a level of splendor as it had possessed in its more illustrious past. Things didn't end with the city's conquest, though. The victors thereafter decided to make one of their own the new emperor of something they called the Latin Empire. His name was Baldwin of Flanders, and as the title suggests, he was also the Duke of Flanders. Moreover, being a crusader, he was obviously a Catholic, which stood in stark contrast with the former emperors of the Byzantine Empire, all of whom were Orthodox Christians. As you might expect, the nobility of the former Byzantine Empire was not too happy about this. And so, they decided to take things into their own hands, creating a state which came to be known as the Empire of Nicaea, located roughly within the western portion of Asia Minor. Another breakaway state from the Latin Empire was the Empire of Trebizond, which, with the city of Trebizond at its center, extended along the coast of the Black Sea and into the Caucasus. But what happened to Epirus? Well, it's a bit complicated. The former Byzantine Empire wasn't only split among successor states and the Latin Empire, but Venice also claimed a large portion of the western coast of what is now Greece and began integrating these lands into their domain. This included the southern Peloponnese, Crete, and a significant portion of Epirus itself. It was amongst the chaos that a man named Michael Angelos I Komnenos Doukas appeared. He was a descendant of the famous Byzantine Emperor Alexios I and cousin of Isaac II. But why is any of this important? Well, Michael had made a career for himself during the reign of Isaac II, but when he was dethroned, also blinded and imprisoned in 1195 by another cousin of Michael, the previously mentioned Alexios III, this came to a rather abrupt end. What's interesting here is it was exactly this incident which resulted in the Crusaders heading to Constantinople in the first place. Following the city's fall, Michael traveled to Arta, an important city in the region of Epirus, which was then still controlled by a Byzantine governor, Senacherim, who died pretty much the moment he arrived. Michael thereafter found himself caught up in suppressing a revolt against the crumbling Byzantine regime, and shortly after this installed himself as governor. To solidify his newfound title, he would later marry a relative of the late Senacherim. So, having become ruler of a wealthy province untouched by the Crusaders, Michael immediately set about securing his position with the regional nobility and clergy. All this happened in the fall of 1204 and essentially marks the unofficial founding of the Despotate of Epirus, which had its capital at Arta. Oh, and just a quick side note here. The word despotate isn't totally accurate since despotazi were subjects of the emperor back in Constantinople, while the Despotate of Epirus was in fact nominally independent for several decades. Moreover, there was a brief period from 1224 to 1246 during which the rulers of Epirus referred to their territorial holdings as the Empire of Thessalonica. For our purposes in this episode, though, we'll just call it the Despotate of Epirus since most of the historical events we're describing are now associated with the despotate itself. Semantics aside, let's get back to the episode. Michael was the new ruler. The region's nobility accepted him, and since the real Byzantine Empire didn't exist anymore, many refugees began to arrive in Epirus. This actually was good news since it brought an influx of new settlers and skilled workers to the region, which in turn meant increased tax revenue. Deserted farmlands became productive again, and trade increased considerably. In turn, this attracted artisans, clerics, and former officials of the Byzantine Empire, all of which made the despotate wealthier than ever before and allowed Michael to build an army. But how was any of this possible? Wasn't a sizable chunk of the Epriote coast under Venetian control? Well, yes, but actually no. It belonged to the Republic of Venice on paper, that's true, but in reality, many places were still unoccupied when Michael rolled in. The Venetians, however, were not his only concern. To the east you had the Latin Empire and the Second Bulgarian Empire, which had proven itself a serious threat, having already taken advantage of the chaos following the fall of Constantinople to seize a number of former Byzantine lands. Michael had to come up with a strategy for preventing further attacks by his Christian neighbors. He did so by establishing amicable relations with Pope Innocent III and even dropped a few ecumenical hints about Christian unity, the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches having split following the Great Schism in 1054. all of which meant the Venetians had to tread rather carefully in dealing with Epirus if they didn't want to get into further trouble with Rome. Because, while on that matter, the Pope was already quite mad over what had occurred in Zara and Constantinople. It's important to stress here that, in the Middle Ages, the Pope had considerably more influence over foreign rulers than in later centuries, and excommunication could have been disastrous, unlike in medieval too. Taking advantage of this, Michael launched a diplomatic offensive, getting the Venetians not to attack and securing an alliance with the Latin Empire, which he later broke in 1209. Following this, the Epriote leader pushed his luck, attacking the empire, then weakened from a conflict with the Bulgarians, which ultimately resulted in his excommunication. This actually proved to be not such a bad thing for him though, as most of the ruling class in the Despotate were Byzantines and therefore Orthodox. In 1212, Michael attacked the Latin Empire again, conquering Thessaly, greatly enlarging the Epriote state. A year later, his armies pushed into the Venetian territories of the region, conquering Corfu and Dyrrhachium. Thereafter, he managed to pry away some territories from the Bulgarians, Serbians, and other minor factions, but his military successes came to a rather sudden end. In 1215, Michael was assassinated in his sleep by a servant, and his brother, Theodore I, succeeded him on the throne. The exact causes of his assassination remain a mystery, although it seems likely the assassin may have been paid to do the deed. If those who had a role in his death hoped it would rein in the Epriote state, it did no such thing. Theodore, in a bid to secure his power, sent the son of Michael into exile and then secured his northern border diplomatically. His targets were not north, but east. He wanted to reconquer Constantinople. And the timing seemed right. Shortly after becoming ruler of Epirus, Henry of Flanders, ruler of the Latin Empire, died, and Peter de Courtenay, the late Henry's brother-in-law, succeeded him. Based in France, he needed to go to Constantinople, and in doing so, he rather boldly decided to pass through Epriote territory. Arriving near Durazzo, he was quickly captured and killed by Theodore. And, to prevent retaliation by enraged Catholic nations, the Epriote leader did exactly the same as Michael, baiting the Pope with a possible reunion of the churches, and surprisingly, it worked again. In the meantime, however, Theodore did not plan to sit idle. In December 1224, he conquered Thessalonica, the second largest city of the former Byzantine Empire. Now, Theodore possessed enough manpower to challenge the Latin emperor in Constantinople, but in doing so, he had gained a new rival. Enter Emperor Theodore Lascaris of Nicaea. As previously mentioned, the Empire of Nicaea had been carved out of the decaying remains of the Byzantine Empire following the Third Crusade, and their primary goal was pretty much the same as Theodore's, the other Theodore, back in Epirus, let's not get these two guys confused, to reconquer Constantinople and re-establish the Byzantine Empire, or something at least like it. So, in 1225, when Theodore was crowned in Thessalonica as the Byzantine Emperor, an act only recognized by the Despotate itself, Nicaea objected, saying the crowning was illegitimate and needed to be overseen by the Patriarch of Constantinople, patriarchs being roughly equivalent to cardinals in the Catholic Church. A bit annoyed, Theodore soon marched on Constantinople, forcing the Nicaeans to retreat, but his siege ultimately proved unsuccessful and he broke off operations, falling back to Epirus. In 1230, Theodore, who had been assembling his forces at Thessalonica, ostensibly for a renewed attack on Constantinople, rather unexpectedly decided to move against the Second Bulgarian Empire instead. This decision, though, would prove disastrous. After a crushing defeat at the Battle of Klokotnitsa, which occurred in early March of the same year, Theodore and many of his officers were taken captive, during which he was accused of plotting against the Bulgarian ruler, Ivan Asen II, and blinded. After this, the Bulgarians went on to conquer nearly all the territories Theodore had taken in northern Macedonia, Albania, and Thrace. In his absence, Theodore was succeeded by his brother, Manuel Doukas, who essentially ruled as a Bulgarian vassal. Deeply unpopular, he was forced out by Michael II, who, upon his return from exile, quickly gained the acceptance of the local nobility and church. It's unclear what Ivan and the Bulgarians thought of him, though, Michael II being the previously mentioned son of Michael I that Theodore had exiled back in 1215. One thing was clear, though, the Despotate of Epirus was now little more than a shadow of its former self. But things were about to change yet again. Regrettably, though, this will have to be covered in another episode. Sorry guys, but the story was just too big to fit into one episode. If you made it to the end of the video, thank you so much for helping out the channel. And if you wouldn't mind in helping us appease the algorithm even further, please consider sharing, liking, commenting, and if you haven't done so, subscribing. And with that, we'll see you again next time. Peace.